The year is 1945, World War II. The deadliest conflict in human history is finally drawing to a close. Yet amidst the celebrations, a nation mourns. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the man who had guided America through the Great Depression and the war, is dead. Suddenly thrust into the spotlight is his vice president, a relatively unknown figure from Missouri, Harry S. Truman. Truman, a former senator and haberdasher, was considered by many to be ill-equipped for the presidency. Yet over the next 8 years, Truman would lead America through some of its most consequential moments, shaping the course of the 20th century. Welcome to Enchanting Lore, where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world. I don't think people understand the immense impact of Harry S. Truman's presidency. Truman's presidency was a baptism by fire. He inherited a world in chaos and emerged as a leader of immense consequence. This video will delve into the most impactful aspects of Truman's legacy, exploring his pivotal role in shaping the post-war world. The year is 1947. World War II has ended, but its scars run deep. Europe lies in ruins. Into this landscape of despair stepped Harry S. Truman, armed with a bold vision for recovery, the Marshall Plan. Named after Secretary of State George C. Marshall, the plan was a radical departure from the isolationist tendencies that had gripped America after World War I. Truman recognized that a stable and prosperous Europe was essential not only for humanitarian reasons, but also for the security and economic well-being of the United States. The Marshall Plan was not merely about rebuilding infrastructure, it was about restoring hope. Truman insisted that recipient nations embrace democratic principles and free market economies. The Marshall Plan was a resounding success. Within a few short years, Western Europe was well on its way to recovery. Industrial production soared, trade resumed, and economies stabilized. The plan laid the foundation for the European Union, a testament to Truman's vision of a united and prosperous Europe. The Marshall Plan stands as a shining example of American leadership and international cooperation. It solidified the transatlantic alliance and laid the groundwork for decades of peace and prosperity in Western Europe. The Marshall Plan serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Even as World War II raged, a secret project unfolded in the deserts of New Mexico, the Manhattan Project. Truman, thrust into the presidency upon Roosevelt's death, was initially unaware of the project's existence. Upon assuming office, he was briefed on the Manhattan Project's progress and the profound moral implications of its use. At the Potsdam Conference, where he met with world leaders such as Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill, the decision of whether or not to unleash this dreadful power now rested on his shoulders. The decision of whether or not to use the atomic bomb was one of the most consequential in human history. Truman sought counsel from his advisors, military leaders, and scientists. The war in the Pacific had reached a brutal stalemate. The use of the atomic bomb could force Japan's surrender and bring a swift end to the war, saving countless lives. Truman, a man of deep faith and conviction, understood the gravity of the decision before him. On August 6, 1945, the world watched in horror as a blinding flash illuminated the sky over Hiroshima, Japan. The first atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, had been dropped, instantly vaporizing everything in its immediate vicinity. 3 days later, another bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, causing further devastation. Japan, facing utter devastation, surrendered unconditionally on August 15, 1945, bringing an end to World War II. The atomic bombings ushered in a new era, the Atomic Age, a world forever shadowed by the threat of nuclear annihilation. The use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki remains one of the most debated events in human history. Supporters argue that it was a necessary evil, a tragic but ultimately justifiable act that saved lives by ending the war swiftly. Critics condemn it as a war crime, an act of unnecessary brutality. The atomic bombings ushered in the nuclear age, a period defined by the terrifying prospect of nuclear war. The legacy of Truman's decision to use atomic bombs is complex and multifaceted, shaping our understanding of warfare, peace, and the fragile balance of power in the world. Am I the only one that didn't know how drastically American foreign policy changed after World War II? Harry S. Truman recognized the need for a new approach, one that acknowledged America's role as a global leader. Truman believed that the United States could no longer afford to remain on the sidelines of world affairs. This shift away from isolationism was a defining characteristic of Truman's presidency. This new era of engagement would manifest in the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and the creation of NATO. The Truman Doctrine, articulated in a speech to Congress in 1947, marked a pivotal moment in the early years of the Cold War. The doctrine declared that the United States would provide assistance to all democratic nations under threat from authoritarian forces. It was a bold statement, a clear departure from past American foreign policy. The Truman Doctrine signaled America's commitment to containing communism and supporting fledgling democracies. The Truman Doctrine laid the ideological foundation for American foreign policy in the Cold War. The creation of NATO in 1949 provided the military muscle to back it up. NATO, a military alliance between North American and European countries, was a direct response to the growing Soviet threat. It was founded on the principle of collective defense. An attack on one member would be considered an attack on all. The formation of NATO solidified the division of Europe into Western and Soviet blocs. The Truman Doctrine was a defining policy of Truman's presidency. It laid the groundwork for America's Cold War foreign policy, shaping the nation's approach to international relations for decades to come. The doctrine was rooted in the belief that communism, if left unchecked, would spread like wildfire. Critics argued that it was a recipe for endless interventionism, but Truman remained steadfast in his belief. The Truman Doctrine established the United States as the leader of the free world. The Truman Doctrine quickly became a global strategy. It provided the rationale for American involvement in conflicts from Korea to Vietnam. The Cold War became the defining struggle of the second half of the 20th century. The Korean War, which erupted in 1950, was a stark illustration of the Truman Doctrine in action. Truman committed American troops to the conflict, marking the first time the United States had gone to war to prevent the spread of communism. This is going to blow your mind. The Korean Peninsula, a land divided. As the dust settled on World War II, the Korean Peninsula, for centuries a unified kingdom, found itself caught in the crosshairs of the emerging Cold War. For 35 years, Korea had endured a brutal occupation under Imperial Japan, its people subjected to forced labor, cultural suppression, and harsh treatment. With Japan's defeat, Korea, instead of gaining its longed-for independence, was divided. The 38th parallel, an arbitrary line drawn across the peninsula, became a stark demarcation line separating Soviet-backed forces in the north from American-backed forces in the south. Two Koreas emerged, each reflecting the ideology of its respective sponsor, a communist North Korea, led by the ambitious and ruthless Kim Il-sung, and a fledgling democracy in South Korea, struggling to establish itself under the leadership of Syngman Rhee. The division of Korea was never intended to be permanent. It was meant to be a temporary measure, a way to maintain order until a unified, independent Korean government could be established. However, the escalating tensions of the Cold War, with its mistrust, suspicion, and ideological competition, poisoned the well of Korean reunification. The two Koreas, locked in a tense standoff, became pawns in a larger geopolitical game, their fate intertwined with the ambitions of superpowers. The fragile peace on the Korean peninsula shattered in the early hours of June 25, 1950. North Korean forces, heavily armed with Soviet-supplied tanks and artillery, launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel, pouring into South Korea with the aim of unifying the peninsula under communist rule. The invasion took the United States and its allies by surprise. The Truman administration, focused on containing communism in Europe, had not anticipated such a bold move in Asia. South Korea's army, ill-prepared and outmatched, was quickly overrun. Seoul, the South Korean capital, fell to the communists within days. The North Korean invasion triggered a global crisis. The United Nations Security Council, with the Soviet Union notably absent, condemned the aggression and authorized the formation of a UN force to repel the invasion. The United States, under Truman's leadership, committed troops to the conflict, marking the first time the UN had engaged in military action to defend a member state. The Korean War, a conflict that would come to be known as the Forgotten War, had begun. Truman's response: defending freedom. Truman, facing a crisis that threatened to escalate into a wider global conflict, acted decisively. He saw the North Korean invasion as a direct challenge to the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, a blatant act of aggression that could not be tolerated. Moreover, he viewed the conflict through the lens of the Truman Doctrine, believing that the United States had a moral obligation to confront communist expansionism wherever it arose. Under Truman's leadership, the United States spearheaded the UN effort in Korea. American troops, along with forces from 21 other nations, poured into the peninsula, pushing back against the North Korean advance. The war was long and brutal, marked by fierce fighting, heavy casualties, and a seesaw battle for control of territory. Truman's decision to intervene in Korea was not without its critics. Some argued that it was a distraction from the more important goal of containing communism in Europe. Others questioned the wisdom of committing American troops to a land war in Asia. However, Truman remained steadfast in his belief that the United States could not stand idly by as aggression went unchecked. He believed that defending South Korea was essential to maintaining the credibility of the United Nations and deterring further communist expansionism. A divided legacy. The Korean War's enduring impact. The Korean War, despite its intensity and global significance, ended not with a decisive victory but with an armistice signed on July 27, 1953. The agreement, while halting the fighting, did little to resolve the underlying political tensions. Korea remained divided, the 38th parallel, once an arbitrary line on a map, now a heavily fortified border separating two hostile states. The Korean War had a profound impact on the Cold War. It solidified the division of the Korean Peninsula, a division that persists to this day. It demonstrated the lengths to which the United States was willing to go to contain communism, and it highlighted the dangers of proxy wars between superpowers. The war also had a lasting impact on American foreign policy. It reinforced the Truman Doctrine's emphasis on containment, shaping America's approach to international relations for decades to come. It led to a dramatic increase in military spending as the United States sought to maintain a global military presence to counter the Soviet threat. And it highlighted the challenges of fighting limited wars, of balancing military objectives with political considerations. The Korean War, though often overshadowed by the Vietnam War, remains a significant event in 20th century history. It was a conflict born out of the Cold War's ideological divide, a war that claimed millions of lives, and a war whose legacy continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia. I bet you didn't know the full extent of the scandals and setbacks that plagued Truman's presidency. Troubled waters, scandals and setbacks. Despite his many achievements, Truman's presidency was not without its share of controversies and setbacks. The glow of wartime victory faded quickly, replaced by economic anxieties, labor unrest, and a growing unease about the spread of communism. Truman, a fighter by nature, faced these challenges head-on, but not without setbacks and political fallout. One such challenge arose from within his own administration. Corruption scandals, particularly within the Internal Revenue Service, tarnished the image of his presidency. Allegations of bribery and misconduct by IRS officials, though not directly implicating Truman, reflected poorly on his leadership and fueled accusations of government corruption. Labor unrest also plagued Truman's second term. Post-war inflation and economic uncertainty led to a wave of strikes, most notably in the steel and coal industries. Truman, caught between his sympathy for workers' demands and the need to maintain economic stability, faced difficult choices. His decision to seize control of the steel mills, though aimed at averting a national crisis, was met with fierce opposition and ultimately overturned by the Supreme Court. The Truman Legacy, a Mixed Tapestry. Harry S. Truman left office in 1953 as a deeply unpopular president. The Korean War, still raging, had taken a toll on his approval ratings, and the scandals that had plagued his second term had tarnished his image. Yet history has judged him far more kindly. Truman's legacy is a complex and multifaceted one, a tapestry woven from both triumphs and tragedies, from difficult choices and enduring consequences. He led America through a pivotal period in world history, navigating the treacherous waters of the early Cold War with determination and resolve. He is remembered as the architect of containment, the president who drew a line in the sand against communist expansionism. The Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, and the creation of NATO stand as testaments to his commitment to international cooperation and his belief in America's role as a defender of freedom. His decision to use atomic bombs against Japan, though forever shrouded in controversy, remains a stark reminder of the devastating power of nuclear weapons and the heavy burden of leadership in times of war. His legacy, like the man himself, is one of contradictions and complexities, of unwavering principles and pragmatic choices, of a common man who rose to meet extraordinary challenges. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Harry S. Truman's legacy, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and suggest new topics you'd like us to cover. Thank you for watching.